It is so explosive. If you look at the trends of how much bandwidth is traversing the internet every year, it is an unbelievable growth rate. The companies that measure it the best are the infrastructure companies. Like Cisco, for example, publishes reports every year on their assessment of the internet growth because they're involved in aggregating and collecting all of that bandwidth that's coming from your cell phone or from your computer and the infrastructure and switching it and routing it like a post office to the destination that it's supposed to go to. So all traffic goes through these switches and routers and the infrastructure of the network, which the average person doesn't typically see because that's buried in some data center somewhere. But that's where all the traffic gets aggregated, and they can monitor and measure how much traffic goes through there. So they have a pretty good sense of how fast internet traffic is growing. It goes back to the days of early internet access, which was accomplished through what were known as voice band modems, which operated over telephone lines and ran at 50 kilobits per second at the fastest. The early voice band modems ran at 1,000 bits per second, a few hundred bits per second, incredibly slow. But that was the only way you could transmit data in the early days of networking. And the only thing you could do in those days was text-based communication. You type on a keyboard and it could send a message, and that was it. Anything else would just take up too much bandwidth and it wouldn't work. So when we introduced the cable modem, and Broadcom really did create that whole industry of broadband cable modems. We introduced the first chip for cable modems, and it's known as DOCSIS, the standard for cable modems. It transformed networking because you now had 1,000 times faster data rate over your internet connection. And you could feel it. You would sit in front of a computer, and rather than just type text, you could now have a video or an image transmitted as fast as a text message was before. So you could see right away that it was so appealing that once you used a computer with a broadband connection, you knew you would never be able to go back to the old voice band modem connection, even if it was free. You would rather pay $50 a month for a cable modem than a free voice band modem because of the attractiveness of that broadband connection. So just the user experience of the two was enough to convince me and everybody else that broadband was here to stay. There is no end to people's thirst for broadband networking. They don't know it. I mean, the average person on the street doesn't understand or cannot quantify how much data they really need in terms of bit rates. Do they need 10 megabits, 5 mega, 20, 100 megabits? That's for the engineers to figure out. But people know that they want information and they want rich multimedia information. So you look at your TV set. In the early days, you had analog video with all the ghosts and shadows and lousy pictures. Then that got transitioned over to digital, which of course Broadcom was one of the pioneers in the digital television business as well with our early products in digital cable TV. We enabled digital television over cable. But when you look at a digital television, picture was great, and then people say, well, I want higher resolution. It's nice to have a good picture, but now I want a much sharper, bigger screen. Instead of a TV that's 20 inches diagonal, I want 30, 40 inches. So then the advent of flat panels came about, and HD television, high definition television, was created in the late 90s. And that transformed television. But it will become standard in every phone within 5 years, that you'll have high definition camera capability in your cell phone. So you'll be videoing a high definition image on your vacation, and you're going to want to instantly send that to your friends to view. It takes a lot of bandwidth. So you multiply that times the 7 billion people on the planet, of which many don't have these high quality cell phones, but 5 to 10 years from now they will. And you have enormous increases in bandwidth that are going to be required over the next decade, or even beyond the next 20 years. So that's our focus now, is investing R&D to improve the speed of both wired and wireless networks to anticipate the growth that we're going to see in this rich multimedia content. It was very exciting. Obviously, when you start a company, and neither one of us, well, actually, I can't say neither. I was actually involved in a prior startup, a company called Paragain Technologies, which some friends who worked with me at TRW in the defense industry had started. So I did have some exposure to being at a startup, but this was our own startup that we were the founders of. That was pretty special, but scary. Obviously, you need to generate business, and otherwise you can't survive as a company. So it was very nervous in the early days, but it was very exciting. And when we got our first contracts in, and we were able to hire people and build a staff, and that's really when things got very exciting. And just each time you generate a new contract for new work, the company starts growing, and you get to hire more people. And I had all the PhD students of mine who were at UCLA that I had been working with while I was a faculty member there. They were graduating. We were able to hire them rather than have them go work for who knows whatever company. We were able to hire them right into Broadcom because I knew who they were, I knew their skills, I knew their capabilities. So it was very exciting for me to be able to take that talent and create this incredible machine of brilliant engineers that we drew upon from the university, but also from our prior work experience. We hired a lot of the experienced engineers that we had worked at in the defense industry over the years. So the combination of that defense industry talent plus the university academic talent was just a very powerful combination in the early days of the company. If you look at the cycle time it takes to develop a product, if you look at a chip today at Broadcom, or over the course of the history of the company, it's not that different 10 years ago. It takes about 2 to 3 years from the time you decide to start a project until the time it appears in one of these end products from one of your customers. That's a long time. So you have to envision 2 to 3 years into the future, what is the customer going to need in his product, and then start designing that today. So it takes a lot of guessing, a lot of visionary work to try to predict the future, which is, of course, difficult to do, and there is a lot of guesswork involved. But when you're immersed in the business day to day, and that's all you do every day, 24 by 7, you dream and think about technology, at least I do. You get a pretty good sense of where the industry's going. So you can anticipate what the needs are going to be 2 to 3 years from now, so that way when you start the project, you get it right most of the time. You don't get it right all the time, but most of the time you get it right. There are many different standards that are created for communications because a standard is basically an agreement by multiple companies on how to build a certain technology, how to communicate, for example, from a computer into the network using what was known as Ethernet technology. That's a standard. And companies go to these standards bodies meetings and they go back and forth and they eventually agree on it. But it turns out there are often multiple standards for a similar technology because they're battling factions and they both go off and do the same thing and replicate the standard. And then you have to pick which one to use. So even in the very early days of the company for computer networking, we ended up picking a standard that didn't go anywhere for fast Ethernet, which was Ethernet technology that ran at 100 megabits per second. We picked the wrong flavor of it, and we built the product, we invested in the chip, brought it to market, and it didn't sell. It turned out the rest of the industry went another way. So we had to very quickly change course, drop all that R&D, and redirect those resources to build the standard that everybody did adopt. And there was some catch-up work to do. We were behind the industry, and then we had to catch up. And today, fortunately, we are in the lead again. But that was just an example of picking the wrong horse and not knowing which standard was going to win. And that has happened several times over the years. There are competing wireless standards all the time, and you have to pick the right one. And most of the time we do. I'd say probably 2/3 to 3/4 of the time we're on the right track, at least 3/4 of the time. But every once in a while, 1 in 4, 1 in 5, we make a mistake. I think the intensity of the work as a startup is much greater. When you're a big, mature company, as we are now, we have 10,000 employees worldwide. We have 2,300 just here in Irvine alone, 12 buildings on this one campus. It's different. You have a lot more structure in the company, a lot more process. It's necessary when you grow a large enterprise. But if you look in the days of being a startup with 50 people in the company or 100 people in the company, everybody in the entire company is in one floor of the building. You walk down the hall and you can meet every single person in the company. You know every single person in the company. You work immensely hard. I mean, 12, 16-hour days minimum, often spending the entire night to get projects out the door. So the intensity of the workload is incomparable when you're a startup versus when you're a mature company. But that's just something you have to do. You just don't have a choice. When you're struggling for your survival, you work hard. But the beauty of being in a startup where everybody is working together as a team, they're all motivated because everybody is an owner in the company. We all have stock in the company. It's an incredible experience when you have, it's almost taking sports times 10, because a sports team is, a basketball team's 10 players, hockey team's 20 players. They're all working as a team for one goal. But now take that times 10 where it's 200 people working as a team towards a focused goal where you have the same level of skill in those 200 people. You can imagine the energy and the accomplishments that you can achieve. So it's pretty exciting. So I think what's exciting about the company now is we are a powerhouse in our industry. When you're a startup, you dream about becoming a powerhouse, but it's a dream. And you're killing yourself working really hard to get there. Now we've got there. We are a powerhouse in the broadband communications semiconductor industry, and that is a very good feeling in and of itself, the pride of that accomplishment, to know that you are literally changing the world because of your products. Everywhere you look in the world, people are using your products. In fact, I've made this comment many times, it is inconceivable for me to imagine any person that is using any form of communication device, whether it's a cell phone or a computer or whatever, where that information does not pass through a Broadcom chip somewhere in the network. Every communication in the world at some point it must pass through a Broadcom chip because of the pervasiveness of the products. I mean, we sell over 2 billion chips per year, and they're going into all of these products: television sets, computers, cell phones, infrastructure equipment. So somewhere in the network there's a Broadcom chip dealing with your data. That is a very, I mean, when starting the company, imagining that could happen is beyond my comprehension. But to have achieved that is something that really is mind-boggling and something we're very proud of. And that is what drives people today, is the impact we're having on the world. We're not just a little tiny company impacting a small community. We are impacting the entire global population with the products that we build. And that is what we look forward in the next 10 to 20 years, is the total breadth and depth of our impact on the broadband communications semiconductor industry, which in turn directly impacts every single person on the planet. Oh, there's a lot of danger with technology. I think the biggest issue, of course, with this ubiquitous information anywhere, anytime, is lack of privacy and lack of security. I think we're seeing that in the world today, that hackers are doing a lot of damage because there's easy access to broadband networks. Anybody can have access to a broadband network these days, and therefore they can do malicious things by trying to hack passwords and get into networks and do damage. So that is the downside of this ubiquitous communication. Privacy is the other downside, the lack of privacy, where now everybody has a Facebook account, a Twitter account, so you just know what's going on everywhere. Every message you send, in theory, could be hacked by somebody and discovered, and you may not want that. So protecting privacy and security in general is the downside of ubiquitous broadband networking. But there's so many upsides that I think it greatly outweighs the downsides. But nevertheless, I think we need to do a lot of R&D as an industry to figure out ways to improve security and improve privacy for those that want it. It is true that anything you buy is going to be outdated. Maybe not the day you take it home, but within a year from when you take it home. But you can't wait, because if you wait a year, then it'll be outdated 2 years from when you buy it. So you just have to accept the fact that technology is steadily advancing. There's nothing you can do about it. And it really goes, it's all about the semiconductor industry, the so-called Moore's Law. I don't know if you've heard about that. It's predicted by Gordon Moore, who was one of the founders of Intel, that chips get twice as powerful every 2 years. And that's just a fact of life of the way they're manufactured and how it's the only industry in the world where things get cheaper and better with time. Anything else that you buy, you build a house with wood and metal and plastic, it gets more expensive every year. But the semiconductor industry, chips get cheaper over time. Or you can spend the same price and have it twice as good. Or you can have the same chip twice as cheap. You have your choice. But every 2 years, things are getting better by a factor of 2. And as a result, products will get better and cheaper over time. And there's nothing you can do about it. So my view is, whenever you feel you need a product, buy it. And don't worry about the fact that you may have to upgrade it 2 years from now. I accept the fact that my iPhone, I have an iPhone 4 today, I'm going to have an iPhone 5 next year, I'll have an iPhone 6 the year after. I just accept that. And it's fine. And maybe we can just give away last year's product to people who can't afford the latest and greatest generation of technology. You don't have to throw it out. I think it's reusable. So I think you look at the whole tier of society of people who can afford the latest and greatest and people who can't, and reuse the newest technology for the people that can't afford it. But don't worry about the fact that your product's going to be obsolete. It's a given, accept it, move on. Broadcom's philosophy from day one is do the impossible. You give a problem to an engineer and say, I know you think this can't be done, but you're smart, go off, figure it out. And magically they do. So in the semiconductor industry, the problems that we look at today that we think cannot be solved, somehow smart engineers working on it will figure it out. So I think Moore's Law will still have a lot of life in it for the next 20 years, and you'll still see a steady progression of improving products, getting cheaper and cheaper as time goes on. Not a lot, which is great for me. I love it because I've been a technologist my whole life. I mean, I was a faculty member in academics and came to Broadcom as the CTO when we founded the company, and I'm still CTO today. So my role really hasn't changed over the 20 years of the company. I'm the CTO, the chief technologist of the company. I try to work on where we're going to be 3 to 5 years from now and work with the smart engineers that we have in the company to brainstorm on new ideas, new product ideas, companies we might want to acquire. So just setting us up for the next generation 3 to 5 to 10 years from now into the future. And I can see that as my role until I retire. I don't see my role changing. Hopefully not for a long time. As long as I can stay healthy, I'll be here. A lot of products end up surprising not only me, but almost everybody in the world. When somebody comes out of left field with a product and you initially say, that's no big deal, and all of a sudden it's wildly successful. And the Apple iPad is a great example of that. But from our perspective, we're more focused on the core technology that goes into the product. So we come up with generic technology for making faster chips that communicate faster, that can process things faster, that have better video quality, better graphics quality. And then a company like Apple will take that and figure out what end product to build. And they often will come up with a revolutionary idea that somebody didn't think of. So we're enabling that, but we don't necessarily have to anticipate that end product. I mean, it would be great if we did, but we're not that smart that we can figure out all the end products for our customers. We just can't do it. technologists know we can enable higher resolution displays with our chips. We can produce more pixels per second to be displayed in the chips we build. Now the question is, can a company out there build a display that has higher pixel density to accommodate the chip that's generating all those pixels? So it really takes both parts to come together. And again, smart engineers will just figure it out. So our smart engineers figure out how to create more pixels per second, and the flat panel and display engineers figure out how to make higher resolution, denser displays, and eventually they come together and companies like Apple can put them into their products. So I just take it as a given that displays will get better, the chips will get better. It just naturally happens. And I don't have to envision the exact details of it. I just have to generically know that they are going to get better. And therefore our chips need to produce better, more pixels per second to be displayed on these higher resolution screens. The biggest changes in the wireless world is the transition to 4G in the next 2 to 3 years. Right now, 4G has been introduced. Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile all talking about it now, and networks are being deployed. But the handsets are just now being introduced. It'll take several years before they become ubiquitous, 3 to 5 years more likely. But all of our R&D today in the wireless world for cellular is focused on these 4G technologies. So that's a given. That will happen. It's going to be a gigantic market given that 2 billion cell phones are sold every year, so the opportunity for chip companies is enormous. So that's a huge investment area for the company. Then on the Wi-Fi side, same thing, just faster and faster Wi-Fi. We're already working on next generation versions of Wi-Fi. We've been a pioneer in the Wi-Fi business literally for a decade. And each generation, the chips just get faster and faster, so you can transmit the data from computer to computer in a shorter amount of time. Television displays just get higher and higher resolution. We've gone from standard definition to what we have now, the so-called 1080p high def. It really goes down to the size of the screen. As long as you're happy with a small screen size, you don't need it. But if you want a 70, 80-inch screen in your living room, which most people probably don't or can't find a wall big enough, but the bigger the screen gets, the more pixels you need to get that same density per inch. So yes, there will be a market for, well, look at the screens today. 10 years ago, nobody had a 50-inch television. CRTs were, I remember 27-inch was like the standard for CRTs. I mean, everybody had 27-inch CRT televisions, tube televisions. And then when flat panels came out, all of a sudden they started jumping up to 30, 40, 50, 60 inches. And now that's the standard. Everybody's getting those size TVs. So I think it would be presumptuous of me to assume that 10 years from now people will not want 80-inch TVs everywhere. I don't know. So we're going to build the chips that can enable it and have Super HD with 4 times the density, and we'll see if the market takes off. Well, we had known each other well before we founded Broadcom. When I worked at TRW in the defense industry, I worked there between 1980 and 1985. And we founded the company in 91, 6 years after I left. I left TRW and went to be a professor at UCLA. But while I was at TRW, Henry Nicholas was also working at TRW in a different department, but I had met him there on some similar projects. And then I went to UCLA to be a professor, and he went back to UCLA to work on his PhD degree.
What year are we talking?
1985. I joined UCLA as a professor of electrical engineering, and he went back full-time, well, not part-time, to actually start working on his PhD degree, and I became his thesis supervisor for his PhD. So I started working with him in 1985. He had taken classes from me. I mean, I knew him very well. And then he worked on his PhD dissertation. So when we founded Broadcom, we knew each other extremely well. He was the business guy and became CEO of the company, and I was the technology guy, became CTO of the company. And then we were both co-chairmen of the board of the company. And that was just a natural fit. It works because I knew I was a technologist, and he was a good technologist, but he was also a very savvy businessman. So I think it was a natural fit. It wasn't like we argued as to who should have what role. I mean, we didn't even have to talk about it. It was just given. And that's how we started the company, and that's how it flourished. He was the CEO and business driver, and I was the CTO and technology driver. No, I think Broadcom is such a great company. It has always been such a great company, and I think everybody recognizes that. Anybody who knows the people at Broadcom knows what we did and why we did everything, and there is absolutely no issues in my mind in terms of those things as far as Broadcom is concerned. We've always built the world's greatest products. We've always operated with integrity and ethics, and never an issue for me or for anybody else in this company as an employee. It really is the only 4G standard out there. It's LTE. Fortunately, everybody in the world has finally agreed on one standard. 3G, there were multiple standards. 2G, even more multiple standards. Finally, for 4G, LTE is the standard everybody's agreed upon. It's got a lot of momentum. I really don't think so. Okay. That's one thing I'm willing to bet on, is that 4G will be the dominant, if not the only standard for LTE will be the only standard for 4G.
One cell phone from one network to the next?
That's right. One cell phone with LTE will work anywhere in the world. Now, granted, there are two flavors of LTE. I should qualify that. I don't want to get into the technical.
Is it LTE Advanced?
No. There's TD LTE and FD LTE, which stands for time division LTE and frequency division LTE. They are not directly compatible with one another, but you can build a chip that will do either one or both. So in fact, the chips we're building for LTE can accommodate both of those standards. But some carriers will deploy one of those flavors of LTE, and some carriers will deploy a different flavor. But it's not a big deal to build a chip that can do both. So you will have one phone that will truly be universal anywhere in the world. That's the key for 4G. 4G phones will work anywhere in the world, assuming there's 4G networks deployed everywhere. I mean, some countries are going to take many years to deploy 4G, but once 4G is deployed, LTE, your phone will be interoperable. And that's a big deal.